the professional world that I was able to then accelerate with additional education on business and leadership. And I ended up working for a number of I worked in, fenestration, windows and doors, so Geldwin, Milgard, but majority of my time was spent more in the automotive and aerospace world. And I found myself progressing pretty rapidly in that leadership side, where I ended up moving on to where I was either operations manager, general manager of these facilities, and usually tasked with coming in and either turning around a division. Like I came into Warren Industries, I turned around 2 different divisions that they had over the course of a number of years. Went into an aerospace company that was failing, turned it around, prepped it for sale, got it sold. And so I worked for companies, in that vein, obviously, heavy industrial type environment. And I owned a gym at the same time, because I've been an athlete most of my life, and continued to kind of put my engineer hat on as I looked at the equipment and the way the body moves and things of that nature. And I decided at one point I was really specializing kind of in biomechanics, even though that's not necessarily a direct education that I have. It's manufacturing engineering, MBA, but it fit well. And so I started taking clinical courses and kind of combining those theories together, and got to become friends with basically the leading like spine biomechanists, physical therapists, developmental kinesiologists in the world, and developing a methodology around movement, which then fed into what I saw as gaps in equipment and other things. So in 2015, I walked away from the corporate world, which I was doing very well in, to take on the scary world of being an entrepreneur. And at this point, I have, if we consider, the books and media, which is a separate, corporation, but it's really just me. I've got three other companies. Well, actually, technically 4, because I still own the gym too. But we've got Kabuki Strength, which is globally recognized brand in regards to innovative strength equipment and education. Barefoot Athletics, which is a human to ground interface, because foot mechanics is a really, really important thing. Second, in my opinion, is priorities to spinal mechanics. So Barefoot Athletics is a minimalist footwear brand that's kind of focused on lifters. And then I've got a supplementation company out of Texas as well. So that is the world in which I live in today, which is a lot of social media and a lot of speaking and a lot of things of that nature. And I also have, again, the book, which has been a bestseller and continues to do really well. And the responses that I get quite regularly from it are huge, and the impact that it has on people, which is, to me, really important. Like, I'm very passionate about people understanding that, struggle and adversity, they are challenges. That's what it is. But it is something that you actually need in your life if you're going to be continually trying to pursue and improve. And we need to not only take advantage of those opportunities, but also look for where they are to take them on. And so this book is, my businesses are all about the physical nature of strength, which is the adaptation and improving oneself. And the book hits more of the mental, emotional, or possibly maybe even spiritual aspects of strength. And so that's I've got an interesting story, and I interweave it with a lot of philosophy and things that I've learned that have brought me success in my life, and that I felt I wanted to share.
So for those of us who haven't read the book, well, I've read it, but for people who haven't, they might not know your background. You grew up living off grid with your parents and your siblings, and basically living in the wilderness of parts of Oregon and Northern California, and talk about adversity. So what led you to actually think that you should jot down your memoir?
So life has always been a continual reflection on that scope that I've had, because it has been very different growing up, you know, a family in the wilderness, foraging for food, killing animals, and family of 6 living off of $5,000 a year or less is definitely some significant struggles to moving through that, being successful in school, getting the scholarship to go to OIT, which was really a huge turning point in my life. Taking custody of my 3 sisters before even finishing college and starting to raise them while I pursued my career and education, and then excelling in that corporate world and now entrepreneurial world. Like, this whole time, I've always felt, for a long time, I've wanted to do this. It's just a matter of finding the time to sit down and do it. I'm not a professional, writer. I've at least for book length stuff, I do a lot of short pieces, or used to, writing in the fitness world anyway. And I really needed a big chunk of time. So it was, once I launched and moved in the entrepreneurial world, and then had a couple years of building my teams to where I could actually kind of step away for, well, it was about 9 months to a year that I, that was my priority during that time, is being able to do that and take a step away from, the day to day, not entirely, but as far as a priority. So it's something I've wanted to do for 10, 15 years at least, and just never had the opportunity.
So Chris's book is split into 2 sections: basically his childhood and early adulthood, and then his career side. I have to tell you, when I read the part about you receiving the full ride scholarship to OIT, I got choked up. It was so emotional after everything you had been through, and for that to happen, I was just cheering for you. I was so excited for you, even though that happened a long time ago.
Yeah,
it was just happening.
It was an interesting story. So I had applied to Oregon State and had been accepted, and I applied for a number of scholarships, and I was turned down for the majority of them, because the school I went to didn't have like the huge extracurricular stuff that some of the people at larger schools went to. Even though I was, 4.0 valedictorian, state level athlete, I wasn't good enough. And so I shared some of my frustration actually in an essay that I wrote for another scholarship for the Ben Bulletin at the time. And they didn't give me the scholarship either. But what they did a front page article that then got picked up by the wire service, and it ran all over the Northwest. And I got a call from OIT like a week later. And they said, "Hey, have you ever considered OIT?" And OIT didn't have a big presence at our, really wasn't known at our high school. Nobody was really kind of referencing kids there. And they said, "Why don't you come on down here and talk to us?" And I did. And it was a pretty substantial package that they put together that allowed me to make that transition and really kind of have a big turning point in my life.
And we're so glad that they did that. So do you want to read some passages from your book?
Yeah. So I have a number of different ones that to kind of string together at least one of the story themes that run through the book, and then also to be able to walk it all the way through from the first half of the book, which mixes a little bit of philosophy, to the later half of the book, which is really about starting to put it together. So this is a mixture of story, and then it's going to go into kind of pure philosophy a bit later. So hopefully the pieces that I put together here will make sense as they put together. It's not, I'll be bouncing kind of through the book a little bit, but I think you'll get the idea where I'm going. I'm expecting this is going to be about 25 minutes or so. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great.
I've got some other pieces I can cut out if you want something a little shorter, but all right. Snakes feel strange. Their skin is cold and smooth, almost silky. The sensation as the rattlesnake's top body glided over me was chilling. The rattle at the end of its tail flicked back and forth a little, indicating its displeasure. Rattle, rattle, rattle. I held the snake's head in my hands, with my thumb and index finger on either side of its neck. Its mouth was open because I was squeezing just behind the jaw, making sure that the snake couldn't move. As it coiled around my forearm, wrapping and unwrapping itself as it sought an escape from my grip, I could see directly down its throat. Moments before picking the snake up, I had caught it. Then I reached down and picked it up. It was powerless to resist. Its only options were to lie limp in my hands or wrap its body around my arm. Looking into the snake's reptilian eyes sent a shiver of fear through my body. If I let go, or lost control, I knew I'd be dead. At the age of 6, Pat decided it was time for me to learn how to handle them in case I was ever cornered by one. I always carried a walking stick with 2 branches growing apart on one end so that it formed a Y shape, just as Pat directed me. When I saw a snake, my job was to capture it. It was moving. If it was moving, this was relatively simple. I could approach it from behind and trap it under the stick. If the snake was coiled, this tactic wouldn't work. Instead, I had to tease the snake a little, enticing it to strike. I needed a long stick. Rattlesnakes can strike about twice as far as you might imagine. My job was to irritate the snake until it struck at the stick, while staying a safe distance away so it couldn't reach me. After it had struck and was uncoiled, I could capture it by pinning it to the ground with a stick right behind its neck. I never got bitten, but we had some close calls. When I was 6, my sister Melissa was a year old. On one occasion, as we sat together in camp, my mom sat near the bush feeding Melissa. Suddenly, Pat began waving frantically at my mom. When she asked him what was wrong, he signaled anxiously for her to be quiet. We soon realized there was a rattlesnake in the bush directly behind her, coiled and ready to strike. Pat was trying to signal my mom to move while simultaneously managing not to startle it. When she realized what his gestures meant, she managed to move slowly away from danger, avoiding sudden movements. Living in that environment, learning how to fend off and manage rattlesnakes was an essential skill. Pat and I, along with the rest of our family, were far out in the mountains, and we didn't have a vehicle at the time. If I suffered a venomous bite, there was no chance of reaching an emergency room. Young as I was, I knew it was important to learn how to protect myself. There was at least one rattlesnake den close to our camp, possibly more. I needed to know how to handle them. They hid in the bushes, and if you came too close to them, flicked their tail in warning. The rattlesnake dens also affected the way we designed our camp. Rattlesnakes don't climb, so we lashed beams into the trees, creating a rudimentary treehouse with our beds hanging among the branches. Me and my brother, 3 years younger than me, played in the field next to our camp. Right by the campground, there was a small stream narrow enough to jump over. Ferns grew along the banks of the stream, while dragonflies and alligator lizards swarmed around us. When we needed entertainment, my brother and I used to catch dragonflies, tie playing cards to them, and release them to race against each other. The one that made it the furthest was the winner. When we weren't racing dragonflies, we were usually out in the meadow chasing alligator lizards. They were hard to catch because they could shed their tails when they sensed danger. Most of the time, we grabbed a hold of them only for them to take off, leaving us holding their tails in our hands. Their tails regrew, so we knew we weren't causing them any long-term harm. Rattlesnakes were a very different deal. Pat enjoyed catching them. He skinned the snakes and pinned their skins to a board to dry them out. He planned to sell them to people who wanted to make them into boots, belts, knife sheath cutters. Rattlesnakes in that area were particularly large, so we got some excellent specimens. We also ate the flesh. Pat told us that the rattlesnake was a prized delicacy at fine dining restaurants, and that we were lucky to get to eat it so regularly. When we killed the snakes, we had to make sure that we cut the head off below the venom sacs. Otherwise, the snake's venom would taint the meat. We only ate snakes we had caught out in the open, never those that had struck at us after hiding in a bush. If a rattlesnake thinks it's about to die, it may bite its own tail, making its meat poisonous. Theme. Embracing fear. Holding a rattlesnake in my hand was an intense experience. I looked into its eyes and all I saw was its desire to end my life. The snake wanted to bite, to kill, and to escape. It had no other aims. Every impulse in my body told me to get as far away as possible. But I knew that the safest thing to do was to stay calm, control my fear, and take charge of my destiny. Any movement I made from fear would only have one outcome: losing control of the snake and giving it the opportunity to strike a deadly blow. The only way to stay alive was to remain calm, regulate my breathing, and take specific steps to ensure that I, not the snake, remained in control. The stories in this chapter come from the earliest years of my life. While some of my recollections of that time are hazy, many continue to stand out vividly even decades later. These experiences shaped who I am and still have an influence on the way I live my life today. I've collected them under the theme of embracing fear. Embracing fear isn't about being fearless. That leads to recklessness and complacency. It's about learning how to mitigate risk. I've faced death many times, and I suspect I will do so again. The potential for disaster always exists. We master it not by ignoring our fears, but by refusing to let them dictate the course of our lives. Instead of running, we must meet our fears head on. We cannot allow fear to control our lives. We must control fear. Leaving Sue and Tom's mountain. For all her strengths, my mother was highly adept at controlling men. She tended to choose men who would do what she said. Later, I found out that she was abused sexually at a young age, an experience that surely shaped her attitude both to society and her relationships. In a relationship with Pat, she was very much the one who called the shots. It was at her insistence that we moved off Sue and Tom's mountain, initially to another nearby peak. It was on this mountain that I learned to handle rattlesnakes. This peripatetic existence was part of a constant quest for the ideal grow site. We now had a road up to the house, but we still had no electricity or running water. Another family lived near us, and once or twice a week we hiked up to their place to hang out while our parents drank beer and chatted. My brother and I never wore shoes as we hiked from our place to theirs along the gravel road, so our feet became incredibly tough. This was also where we took our baths. Outside the house sat a gigantic cauldron raised off the ground, perhaps 8 feet across and 2 feet deep. We filled the cauldron with water from the spring and lit a fire underneath it. When the fire had burned all day and the water was hot, we jumped in and bathed. Our soap came from the aptly named soaproot, a plant that grew on the mountain. As the name suggests, the soaproot bulb is a naturally occurring cleanser. We dug it from the ground and used it to wash our bodies. I don't remember much about the family on the mountain, but I do remember playing with a kid about my age. Like all young children, we liked running around and often got ourselves into trouble. One of our favorite games was finding nests of bees, knocking them from the trees and trying to escape before the bees emerged to attack us. Sometimes we got away in time. Other times, we limped home covered in bee stings. It was during this period that my mother became pregnant with my second sister, Janice. When the time came for her to give birth, we didn't have a vehicle, so she hiked out to the main road and hitchhiked into town. Unfortunately, the first vehicle to pass was a dump truck. For some reason, the driver of the truck didn't invite my mother into the cab. Instead, she climbed into the bed of the truck where she lay while she was driven into town and deposited at the hospital. She promptly climbed out of the back of the truck, entered the hospital, and gave birth to my sister. A shadow crosses our lives. Although we lived in a home we called the Alien House, we spent most of our time in the mountains. Pat would chop wood and drive between the different weed growing sites we had established. He and my mother came up with a simple strategy. They found sites where one of the many creeks that flowed through the mountains could easily be diverted to feed water through the hoses into the irrigation channels. They kept individual sites small and planned their locations carefully to minimize the risk of detection. With neighboring Humboldt County known as a weed-growing hotspot, the authorities did a lot of air surveillance in search of clandestine growth operations. Pat countered this by growing his plants extremely large, because if they were close to the size of trees, it would be difficult to distinguish between weed and the other foliage from above. The plan must have worked because we were never busted during this period. In some ways, we lived an idyllic life, at least in the summer. Danger was never far away, however. Large commercial weed growers were very territorial, and anyone who stumbled unwittingly onto one of the plantations was at risk of being immediately shot. In addition to bears and huge rounds of woods, we lived with the knowledge that if we ventured too far off one of the hiking trails, we might bump into someone with a gun. Our camp was positioned to offer us maximum visibility. There was only one gravel road leading into the area, and it rolled around the mountain for miles. Factoring in the twists and turns of the mountain road, which made progress slow, we could see anyone who approached long before they reached us. One day we were sitting together in camp when Pat alerted us to the presence of danger. We looked out across the mountain and saw a trail of several police cars advancing slowly towards us. Instantly, Pat ran off to hide while my mother destroyed all the small number of plants we were growing at a nearby site for personal use. I was left to watch my younger siblings. When the police arrived, Pat and my mom were nowhere to be seen. The officers took me, my brother, and my sisters and put us in the back of the police cruiser with the intention of putting us in protective custody. My sisters and my brother sat on the back while I sat in the front in the passenger seat. The officer who had busted my mom a couple of years earlier was now a sheriff. He sat in the driver's seat, chatting amiably with me while I asked about the police technology in the vehicle. The only vehicles I knew were old, so a police car with a fancy new stereo and various other police technology was fascinating to me. I looked back on my response and it seemed surreal. We were being taken forcibly from the only family we knew. My brother and sisters were wailing in English, yet I was chatting civilly with one of the people who was taking us away. Even at the time, I remember questioning myself internally. I couldn't understand why I wasn't exhibiting a lot of emotion. On the outside, I was cool, calm, and collected. On the inside, I was trying to figure out what, if anything, I was really feeling. The only charge they were able to book my mother on was poaching. Approximately once per week, we killed a white-tailed deer for food. They were our primary source of protein. That sounds like a lot, but the deer in those mountains were tiny. They didn't make many meals. Pat melted into the forest and avoided arrest completely. My mother returned to camp and was taken into custody. Although the police never located any of the grow operations, they took me and my siblings on account of our living conditions and placed us into foster homes. Skipping details on living in foster homes. One of the finest examples of my mother's indomitable will occurred during this period. Sitting in jail and frustrated at being parted from her family, she began to reflect on what she had seen and heard about the cops who had brought her in. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something about the way the case had been handled was disturbingly wrong. Eventually, by piecing together her own experience and other shreds of evidence, she came to the conclusion that some aspects of child protective services in the county were a front for a pedophile ring. She began to believe that some of the local police officers were implicated and that they were deliberately preying on the people living in impoverished, remote communities who didn't have a lot of resources or connections. This might sound like a far-fetched story, but she was right. The group was taking children into foster care with the intention of selling them into a larger nationwide pedophile ring. Despite her strained circumstances, my mother connected with a lawyer living in Los Angeles and convinced him what she was telling was the truth. He agreed to take on the case pro bono. As the case progressed, the details slowly emerged, and numerous police officers were prosecuted and thrown in jail, including the sheriff who had arrested my mother for possession of marijuana. Due to the investigation my mother started, the man who was acting as foster father to my 3 sisters was caught as he attempted to board a plane and flee the country. He was part of a national sex trafficking operation in which he intended to sell my sisters. At this point, my mom was unable to demonstrate that she was a suitable parent, so she called her parents, my grandparents, and they stepped in. They drove from Idaho to California, collected my 3 sisters and myself, and took us with them to live in Idaho. Meanwhile, Pat and my mother threw themselves into creating a more stable family situation they could reclaim custody. I've got a couple pictures, since we're doing this on Zoom, I could share during this period as well. Here's see how that is.
Oh yeah.
That's me and my brother on the bottom and my mom holding my sister. I don't know if you could see in the quality through Zoom, like the tattered clothing and dirt and grime and all that stuff. This was actually on a separate story of regarding a murderer that we had to go into town while he was being arrested and hang out. So here's my grandma with my youngest sister, picking her up from the courthouse after the arrest.
Wow.
Now we're going to jump forward into around the early 2000s. So just a little background. My mother had a mental breakdown, ended up out in Montana, leaving my sisters with their father, Pat, which was not a good situation. That's when I stepped in and took custody of them, and this is talking about the return of my mother. The return of my mom and a dark figure from our past. While I was raising Amy, this was the last of my my younger 3 sisters, so my mom began to reappear and become part of my life again. She had moved from Montana back to Eastern Oregon, and she was living in a small community named Burns, where she worked at a branch of a McDonald's. At first, her contact with the rest of the family was understandably limited. My sisters were resentful that she had abandoned them. While I was comfortable raising them, I was angry and disappointed that she had put them in such a difficult position. Over time, however, my sisters began to reach out more to my mom, arranging meetings and moving towards forgiveness. I felt that the issue was between them, so when my sisters forgave, I followed suit. She later moved to Mitchell, Oregon, where she lived with a miner named Leonard Kapinski, also known as Cop. On one occasion, when I visited Mitchell to see my mom, she told me she had run into the sheriff who had arrested her for possession of marijuana and who had subsequently taken me and my siblings into custody. He had served 20 years in prison for his part in attempting to traffic my sisters. Although she hadn't seen him for over 2 decades, my mom recognized him immediately. When he realized my mom lived in the same town, he began stalking her. He drove past her house extremely slowly. If he saw her at the window, he formed his fingers into the shape of a gun, using his thumb as a hammer and pretending to shoot her. My mom decided that she needed to leave town, so she left her job, packed up her things, and drove away. Before long, she noticed she was being followed by an associate of the former sheriff. An hour or 2 out of town, the same car was behind her, keeping its distance. The roads in Eastern Oregon are quiet, and there wasn't a lot of passing traffic, so it was clear that the driver was traversing the same route as my mom. On reaching a fork in the road, she pulled off the road, exited her vehicle, and pulled out her rifle. On such a desolate road in the middle of the desert, there was no telling when someone else might show up. She was completely alone. Moreover, visibility was exceptionally high. Anyone approaching would be visible from miles away. My mom crossed the road to the opposite side, set up her rifle, and stood by the side of the road, waiting for her pursuer. When he came close to her position, he saw her, pulled his truck off the road, and sat there waiting. My mom had him at gunpoint, but she didn't know what to do. She told me later that although she had never wanted to kill someone, she wasn't sure what she would do if he got out of the car. She told herself she could run into the desert where it would be nearly impossible for him to find her. Nonetheless, she was known as a wild, self-sufficient, and extremely stubborn woman. There was a possibility in her mind, and probably in her pursuer's mind too, that she might kill him if she felt that she needed to. Eventually, he gunned his truck, made a U-turn in the road, and drove back the way he had come. She jumped into her truck, waited until he was totally out of sight, and drove to Mitchell to meet up with Cop. While she was living with Cop and Mitchell for a couple of months, my mom had an eerie experience. She heard a knock on the door and opened it to see a couple of hunters standing outside. They told her they were lost and asked to use her phone. My mom, ever hospitable, agreed to let them use her phone, but was highly skeptical of their story. She suspected they were connected to the man who had been stalking her in Burns. To convey her distrust, the fact that she was to convey her distrust and the fact that she was armed, she pulled out a gun, sat down, and dropped her gun on her lap. Cop was also in the house and registered her response. She explained the situation, and before long, the police showed up at the former sheriff's home in Burns. The most likely reason for this was that Cop pulled some strings, perhaps by calling his senator and persuading the police to search my mom's stalkers' homes, although I don't know that for certain. The police told the former sheriff that they wanted to search his property because they suspected he was complicit in poaching. Instead, they found the remains of 4 women he had killed and buried on the grounds of his property. It turned out that not only was my mom's stalker heavily involved in human trafficking, he was also a serial killer. In 1985, when my mom sent me running down the street to make sure there were witnesses present as he took her into custody, it's very possible that her request saved her life. All right, we're going to jump into a little bit of philosophy. Transformation rarely happens on its own. Typically, it's triggered by some form of stimulus. Sometimes the stimulus is external. To really shape your life, however, you may need to generate your own stimulus. This kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. It only occurs through deliberate effort and self-reflection. As Shakespeare wrote, "This above all, to thine own self be true." While Shakespeare's concept of truth is not bound by time, it is contingent on a central pillar that is increasingly difficult to attain in today's world: true self-understanding. We live in an individualistic world where self-expression is supposedly prized, yet the forms that self-expression can take are heavily mediated by social pressures. If we switch on the television or walk past a billboard, we may receive the message that the way to be true to ourselves is to buy a new brand of aftershave or a car. It's a shallow, curated form of individualism. No one else knows who you really are, nor can they sell you a pill or a consumer good that will magically do the work for you. If you're willing to pursue the path of active transformation, I urge you to seek out an honest understanding of your true self. In Bruce Lee's words, to become different from what you are, you must have some awareness of what you are. It's a scary venture into unknown places, either internally or externally. We're creatures of habit who naturally seek to avoid the pain and difficulty that comes with embracing change. If you want to transform, however, you will need to fight the tendency day in and day out. I've done that by throwing myself into unstable and unpredictable situations, forcing myself to adapt and learn as I find a new way. I tore the roof off my house and put myself in a position where I needed to figure out how to rebuild it before the rainy season began. I took on a job only to discover that the owner was deliberately running the company into the ground. And instead of playing it safe and calling it quits, I decided to take ownership of the situation and do something about it. I chose to take ownership of my circumstances and mold the internal and external world to my will. I chose to leave my mark on this world. For me, shaping my environment and having a tangible impact on the world is a powerful, deeply satisfying driving force behind my choices. In business, in the weight room, and in every other aspect of my life, I love to walk into a situation and alter it for the better. I love helping people believe in themselves and achieve things that they never thought possible. Over the period described in this chapter, I found myself doing this more and more. I supported people to step up and become more than they thought was possible. This process has been incredibly impact on all aspects of a person's life. When you go beyond the bounds of what we thought we could accomplish, we alter our self-perception, becoming more confident in all aspects of our life. I've seen situations where a person takes on responsibility for a difficult project at work, then decides to go back to school and study for a degree, or pursue a dream job they always cherished but never believed they could fulfill. All meaningful transformation is guided and sustained by our deepest convictions, whether we are aware of them or not. What do we truly value? Family, adventure, financial stability? Whatever it is, you can't measure your success by the values of other people. Do you believe that you'll be happy if you own a mansion and a fancy car? If so, dig a little deeper. What value will those things express? The fancy car and the house are symptoms of a deeper goal. I'm not here to reshape your morality or tell you what you should value, simply to ask, why? Financial security and providing for your family are valid motivations behind your life choices. Or maybe you just love cars and houses. Whatever your reason, however, understand that your decisions are rooted in deeper values, whether or not you are aware of them. The more clearly you understand those values, the more capable you will become of leveraging your efforts in an optimal way. My challenge to you is to dig deeper and always ask, why? The true goal is meeting the values behind your achievements. When you realize this, you can take a step back and choose your path wisely with full awareness. Start with your values and build your goals that are a true extension of who you are. Goals that bring deep satisfaction to the soul and leave the world a better place than you found it. If you're contemplating a change in your life, I want you to engage in the practice of Socratic Self-Examination and give yourself the attention and effort that is too often wasted on fleeting things. Are you happy with the current state of your life? And if not, why not? What's missing for you? What is it about your life that you find unacceptable right now? Keep asking that question and dive deeper. Do you think that having more money or a better job will take away the itch? Or is there something more fundamental you need to express if you're going to be happy with the way you spent your time on this planet? If you're comfortable with where you are, that's fine. Not everyone wants to drive major change. But if you have a burning desire to leave your mark on this world, you must be painfully honest with yourself. You must look repeatedly for the gaps where you can become a better version of yourself. You're not the same person as you were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Throughout our lives, we all change and evolve, whether we wish to or not. Only a few, however, make a deliberate choice to actively seek change. Transformation comes when we marry the desire for change with a strong sense of purpose and intent, and then we take action. I like to talk about the gut check for leadership. If you truly need to make change, you'll feel it deep in your gut when you are confronted with a dilemma. Your stomach will begin to twist, and you'll know that you can't be right with yourself until you take action. Existential philosopher Soren Kierkegaard called this phenomenon the dizziness of freedom, an inescapable confrontation between the present and future self. Even if you're scared, your gut won't let you escape from the need to jump, to make a change, and to become who you can be. Your gut will tell you what's important. It will also tell you what's not important. If you don't feel a physical reaction in the face of major change, again, ask yourself, why? Self-initiated change is an act of self-destruction, a willful aggression of the self. When faced with a potent choice, you should feel your heart pounding and your stomach rising towards your throat. If you're apathetic and indifferent, what does that mean? Whenever you feel your gut twist, it's an indication that there's something for you to do, a conversation to have, a project to take on, a decision to make. Heed that signal and run towards it. Let that sink in for a minute before I read one last short passage. Many types of strength. I'm known globally as a creator and purveyor of strength education and products. This book hopefully fills a gap. It enables me to talk about the other equally important aspects of strength that aren't covered by the work I do with Kabuki Strength. These are mental, emotional, and even spiritual elements that make strength a universal virtue worthy of pursuit by all. Strength is our capacity to bend your will to living the life you choose. Marie Curie wisely said, "Life is not easy for any of us, but what of that? We must persevere. We must have perseverance and, above all, confidence in ourselves. We must believe that we are gifted for something, that this thing must be attained." Life gives us, each of us, a fair share of opportunities to experience and challenge and hardships, whether we ask for them or not. These are valuable, important moments that we can use to grow stronger or adapt to persevere. Sometimes strength can be the difference between life and death. Perseverance is an action derived from a pure belief in your own strength, even in what seems like total defeat. Just like Pat and my father, I struggled with alcohol. I've stepped close to the edge, lured by the deceitful whispers of the devil who promises that ending it all will bring comfort. My redemption has been a powerful self-realization that my identity is not found in my circumstances or in what happens to me. I am strong. I am my own will made manifest in this world. As you grow in self-awareness, your understanding of your strengths becomes more precise. Be intentional. Take the time to explore your passions and figure out which strengths you want to cultivate. I don't want you to settle for the role of a consumer in this world. I urge you to master the necessary skills to contribute in a meaningful fashion and to use those skills to make a difference in your own life and the lives of others. It's far too easy to fall into the trap of working a job you hate and living for the weekend. Find a way of breaking out of that paradigm. Don't be afraid of trying hard. Don't be afraid of failing or looking like an idiot. There are no prizes for being cool and collected, but achieving nothing of value. Leave your mark on the world. Grow your strength through purposeful and diligent practice. Your personal evolution is rooted in perpetual action and reaction, the antithesis of complacency. You never know when something will click into place and you'll fall in love with a discipline that can change your life. On a whim, I decided to compete in a strength competition, thinking it would be an interesting one-off experience. Instead, I enjoyed years of competitive powerlifting, held numerous world records, and now harness my love of the iron to perform feats of strength to support causes I believe in. I could have held back, worried because I wasn't sure how to perform a deadlift. If I'd done that, I might never have taken part in the sport that has become a cornerstone of my life. You don't need to be good at something before you try it, but you must be resolute in your efforts when you choose to master something. Mediocrity is the ugly, fatal disease of wasted potential and eternal regret. In the words of Dante Alighieri, and I, my head oppressed by horror, said, Master, what is that I hear? Who are those defeated by their pains? And he to me, this miserable way is taken by the sorry souls of those who lived without disgrace and without praise. They now commingle with the coward angels and the company of who were not rebels nor faithful to their God, but stood apart. The heavens, that their beauty not be lessened, have cast them out, nor will hell receive them. Even the wicked cannot glory in them. In practice and in heart, I regularly repeat these 4 words. There is always more. Perfection is not our destination. Instead, we follow the never-ending trail of joy and tears, knowing full well that it has no end. The alternative, however, is unacceptable. As you persevere and find success, the sweet voice of praise from your own mind and those around you will whisper, "You are amazing. You did it." Acknowledge that voice, but don't allow it to seduce you. Instead of dwelling on my success, I see clearly the areas where I'm still growing and improving. However good you think you are, you can always be better. This is the nature of ceaseless self-improvement. You can always dig a little deeper, work a little harder, and push a little further than before. There is always more.
Thank you, Chris. I would invite everyone to turn on your cameras now, and let's take some questions. I know I have several. I know Mira has some. So if you would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute.
Okay, I'll chime in here. So this is, I was so interested reading your book, Chris, because it just so happened that I was born in Mendocino County.
Oh, really?
My dad lives in Santa Rosa. So all of these areas, you know, my little brother has videos of playing with rattlesnakes and stuff like that. There's a story about me as like a toddler walking into a rattlesnake den. You know, of course I have no memory of this, but it's like a story in our family. So that was just all like really interesting to kind of go back to some of those places and think about that. My question's like really easy. My first question, I was curious, you talked about in the book that you got the nickname Kabuki, I think during your time in Klamath Falls at Oregon Tech.
I did.
I don't know. Is there a story about that? Where'd that come from?
There is a story about it. It's not exactly a flattering story, honestly. So I rarely share it. Right behind me, you can see that's the Kabuki mask. So for me today, it's one, it's differentiating. It's not used very often. So honestly, it's a great Google search term. Because we will be the first thing that pops up. But it's all about putting that game day face on, becoming another version of yourself, that mental side of it. Like, we can provide you the tools, the methods, And that's just like school does too. But at the end of the day, you have to be the one that steps up to the plate, and no one else is going to do that for you. I can try to write some words and things to encourage and help that. But yeah, I was known as a wrestler in high school because I was fairly good at that. And then I God, I don't know if I want to tell this story. It's pretty embarrassing, but
you don't feel like you have to.
Yeah.
Maybe we can have a phone conversation some other time.
Maybe, yeah.
And there were a lot of close calls in your life. It seems like near misses. How do you think that shaped your drive to just keep setting goals for yourself or to live in the moment the way that you have?
Yeah, I definitely think that has done that. It's an interesting for me balance of like trying to find stability based on the environment that I grew up and trying to get away from that, to also being completely uncomfortable when I find it and needing to find that chaos, and also dealing with the fact that I can be extremely non-risk averse, and getting myself into situations which you'll tell, like learning that I could literally, torture myself to death, which I found out like in Australia when I, dropped 40 pounds and continued to push until I lost my hearing and and couldn't slurring my words, and realized that I was about to die. That I was able to just like push through into things like that is it definitely helps you have a better understanding of yourself. Being a father and a leader is definitely helped like kind of root me a lot more away from instances like that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you didn't even go into that story. That was something that I didn't really realize, the intensity of what it takes to drop weight just for the weigh-in and all of that. So that was pretty wild to learn about that. Any other questions, folks?
I can't hear you. Oh. I see you speaking, Alan, but I can't hear you. Oh.
If you have a headphone or something, you might have to unplug it. We can't really hear you.
Also, if anybody wants to type a question in the chat box, Becky or I would be happy to read that as well. So that's another way to ask a question.
Yeah, I can see. I think I have access to that too.
Okay, Alan, you want to try?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I had it reconnected. It must have fell asleep or something while it was inactive. Anyway, I was wondering what made you choose MET technology as you went into college. You got that great opportunity for Oregon Tech. You had basically any of them, that you could pick from. What led you towards MET?
Another embarrassing story, but I'll share this one.
Perfect.
Understand, when I was going to school, I was also, like I said, I had a lot of the finances taken care of, but I also had no fallback. Like there's no couch I can go back at home. I was working full time. I ended up taking custody of my sisters, was doing all, this stuff. So I relied a lot on my skill of just being, this is not like OIT did great things for me. I did well there. I wasn't a great student, honestly. And the fact that I would just show up for the tests so anyway, when I entered college, I planned on going mechanical engineering because I didn't even know what manufacturing engineering was. And the advisor, there was a misentry, and I was accidentally signed up for manufacturing engineering. And the first year, all the classes were the same. So I kept saying, well, next term I'll get up there and change it. But it would require me to get up and go to, the office and change it. And so finally it was just easier for me to go, I'm going to get a manufacturing engineering degree because, well, I'm probably going to get a dual major, so it doesn't really matter. So it was an accident, and I never corrected it because I didn't actually go up to the school very often, which again it's a little embarrassing, but like I had a lot on my plate, and I knew I was very good at taking tests and capturing information in different ways, and so I relied on that to allow me to use my time elsewhere as well. So, and then I ended up, I don't know if I discussed in the book, but I was 9 credits. So I ended up going for the dual major. And I was like in my last 9 credits at the time, but I was managing a third of the plant at the Geldwin of Oregon at the time. And I think I had one of my sisters. I was just picking up my second sister, and I had a business that I was running as well. I'd started a retail store and doing paintball stuff on the weekend. And so I was in my last 9 credits, and I basically dropped out that last term to finish up my second degree, because I also realized that was the time I was really enjoying the leadership side of it. And I was like, I don't see that I'm actually ever going to be like sitting at a computer doing engineering work. I'm definitely felt my next step was getting an MBA or a master's in management. I was looking at the master's in management at that time because it was in Southern Oregon. So anyway, that's the story behind that one. I honestly didn't know what manufacturing engineering was prior.
Right on. I found really
but the engineering was also just a decision out of high school. I was like, I'm good at math. What are good careers? Engineering. Let's pick that one. Like, there wasn't a lot of as much
That's
thought
awesome.
as you would think.
Yeah, I found it interesting because I was able to get an opportunity with Geldwin as well, my senior year, and then I am actually working at Warren Industries right now. And I had no idea that you worked at Geldwin and Warren, so that was kind of cool to learn.
Yeah, I'm still actually friends with a lot of people at Warren. I ran the large winch division for about 3 years, which that one wasn't really it was that we could probably have an offline conversation about what I did at some point. But then the fabrication division was completely failing at the time, and they actually let go of the leadership team in fabrication. And because of the work I'd done with reducing costs and changing the culture environment on the large winch team, I came in and turned around the fab division for a couple of years. So
right on. I know you kind of know the culture because you work there, but this working right now, we're all working remote, all the engineers and everybody, and it's been a pretty strenuous like culture change within Warren because they're very old fashioned. Not many people were very keen on using technology working remote, and so it's been a really big learning experience there. It'd be fun to talk about it more, but.
Yeah, well, I'm my facility's 5 minutes from Warren, by the way. So we could grab lunch sometime. What team do you work for?
I'm MPD on winches, mainly source products, and so I work with a lot of overseas suppliers and other vendors around the country to bring in products from outside in. So.
Nice. My engineering manager here was worked in engineering at Warren as well. So
that's cool.
Yep.
You two will have to meet in person soon.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it'd be really cool because I actually, when I was trying to find a gym around there, I saw Kabuki on the map and I had no idea that you ran that. And then I was at the event when you got the award because Jessica and her group was there as well. And I got to see you get your award and it was pretty cool. So I was like,
nice.
oh, can I put 2 and 2 together? And I was like, oh, okay.
Since we're speaking about education, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but Oregon Tech is starting its first ever doctorate program, and it's going to be in physical therapy.
So really?
I think you would be a fabulous speaker once that gets going. So we'll have to be in touch about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I speak at University of Western States, and there's there's 2 different physical therapy colleges that use my material in their curriculum. As well in their doctorate programs. So and University of Western States uses some of my material in their flexion and tolerance continuing education doctorate courses as well. So yeah, but I have no background in that stuff, educational. And I'd love to go back and work on a doctorate in that, but then there's too much biology and all the undergrad stuff I'd have to go do. So.
I have a question.
I'd love to speak. I speak on these topics all the time within that environment. So at that level.
I have a question about, you mentioned so many different people, relatives, coworkers. people that have come in and out of your life. After the book came out, did some people start reaching out to you? Had they heard that they were in your book? What did they think about being featured in your story?
I think most everybody that was in the book I had spoke to prior to its release, so I don't think that there was any issues. There's some conversations I've had to have with my mother, but she understands, like, some things in there that you read it and you could take it as a very like negative, but I think most people, they read it and they really see how she's spoken very highly of as far as her strength and virtues that actually are a huge piece of who I am today. So yeah.
I thought that was really generous on your part, the way that you did frame both Pat and your mom in such a positive, you really highlighted their strengths when it could be, like you said, it could be perceived as like these folks were really putting children at risk, but you really turned it and flipped it on its head, and you highlighted the strengths that you gained from them.
Thank you. I'm really glad that people were able to pick that up in the reading of it, because I was worried that it would just be viewed kind of very negatively. And it was, like I said, I think that you've always got to look at those other aspects and what you gain from experiences and people.
Any other questions, folks? Let some other people talk.
Yeah, sorry, my webcam doesn't work, so I'm not able to start that up. But I have a question about your Grand Goals campaign.
Yeah.
So I know the 1,000-pound squat that you did recently was supposed to be the concluding grand goal, but I'm wondering if there's any other grand goals that maybe don't quite fit in that campaign, but something similar that you're working towards right now.
Not necessarily. So that was something I spent 4 years on, and really was the conclusion of me lifting heavy, which is a good discussion, because there's a lot of people in the community that go like, well, no, you'll just keep doing something, you'll get drawn back in, and I a big piece of like this book is, or at least my philosophy as a whole, is really understanding those root values, and things like this are ways that you can express that. And if you understand what your values and how you want to live are, it allows you to make that transition. So we see this issue a lot with like professional athletes, for example, that, or any high level athlete. You'll see a lot of times where if there's an injury or something traumatic that happens that takes them out of the game, or just a retirement from a career where they really struggle. And that struggle can really take them. We see depression, we see suicides, we see lack of, apathy, all these sorts of things. Not always, right? But we do see this very highly prevalent when people take something like that to define themselves. I am this, and then that thing is something that can be taken from you. But that, if you understand that is an expression of the values, there's a lot of other ways that you're going to have a life that can realize or execute or express those in different manners. So yes, I still have some very aggressive goals for my future, but they are not of the physical lifting kind. I'm definitely getting to the point where to me, if I'm not able to push it at that extreme level and do things that nobody else in the world's done before, doing something subpar, I'm shifting the focus to, things that I want to do with my business, my family, leadership, philanthropy. Those are the directions that I'm shifting that.
And you still hold the Guinness World Record, correct?
Yes. So yeah, for people not familiar with the Grand Goals campaign, but I did this. I quit professional powerlifting around the time I started my businesses, just so that I could do things on my terms, the way that I want to do them. I made a lot of changes in my life, and I set some goals for myself, which was to be the only human to ever deadlift 1,000 pounds and squat 1,000 pounds, and to have done it for reps as well. And so I hold the Guinness World Record for the sumo style deadlift. I'm the only person that's ever done 1,000 pounds. I did 1,001 for almost 3 reps. And then 3 years later came back and squatted 1,000 pounds for 3 reps as well. So under any conditions, any body weight, gym lifts, doesn't matter. I'm the only person in the world that's ever done that. So there's I call it the grand goals, obviously, because 1,000 is a grand, but also it's the showing people, again, like, what you can really do things that are absolutely phenomenal that people think are outside of reach if you have the discipline, the dedication, the passion, and you really execute on those. And so it's really just about taking on, not lifting, but just big gnarly ass goals that you'd love to do in your life, right? Just grand, over the top. So it has a dual meaning, and so that was something that I did. And the squat got a lot of publication recently when I did that. So, which was kind of a crazy story, because it was like basically done 2 days before the shutdown of everything related to COVID. It was supposed to be done in San Diego at a big event, and 4 days before that happened, that closed down, shifted to a local event. They changed everything to no more than 25 people max, and then we did it to just private. With our staff, and did a live stream of the whole thing, and then that was on a Saturday, and then Monday, basically everything shut down, all gyms closed, and so it would have, if I hadn't done it then, it would have never been done, because I couldn't. It's not something my body I would have been able to come back and do again. It was 3 years of training, a year solely for that date. And so it's not something in my mid 40s that I'd be able to turn back around and be willing to walk through again.
I wanted to show everyone a couple of resources. So the book, I got my copy on Amazon, and they have the audio version, the Kindle version, paperback. So pick up a copy of the book if you haven't done so already. This is Chris's website, and I will email this to everyone afterwards. So the website, and then also a link to the podcast.
And you can, if you forget, you can just go to Christopher Duffin or chrisduffin.com, and it's got links to the purchase page, all my different companies, all that stuff as well. So it's pretty easy to find. So
I'm not going to give anything away, but at the end, well, actually throughout the book, you pose questions to the reader. And then at the end of the book, there are 6 very specific questions that you want people to use for self-reflection and growth. I don't want to give away what those questions are, but is there one that you could leave us with today as an audience that we can, sit with over the weekend?
Yeah. I'll do something a little different, since I've got the OIT group here, and more of the just thinking down the engineering vein of things, because there is actually a lot of philosophy pulled from that into this. So I talked about values, and really also the understanding your direction, and but knowing you'll never actually hit the goal. So these are 2 things taken from used in kind of Japanese manufacturing philosophy, continuous improvement, Kaizen type stuff. So one of them that I like to pull into is understanding, like, if you've got to really understand what values behind something is, take that physical goal that you've got and ask yourself in the 5 whys process, okay, to start peeling back the layers of the onion until you can get to the point of, no, I want to make this change because truly it's an expression of my creativity. It's because I want recognition. It's because I want accomplishment. It's because I value adventure. But it's not that physical, I want a new job that pays better, or like there's a reason that you want these things. Really use that 5 why methodology. And so you'll find out as you work through that you end up with, like, what I call core values and you typically like 5 to 7 ones are pretty useful, and the ones I just mentioned are some of mine. So, for me, it's stability, creative outlet, challenge, sense of accomplishment, recognition, family, adventure. Like these, there's a bunch right there. Okay. So those are like key cornerstone ones of what I frame my life. Those aren't things that you can ever really tangible have. And so if we think about the continuous improvement methodology, a lot of times the word North Star is used. It's this like vision of where you're going. And what you want to do is always be taking a step in the direction of this North Star. Okay, this line of, here's this perfect leg. So again, from a manufacturing perspective, a one-piece flow. We know a vision of what it's going to be like. Well, you're never going to have your whole supply chain and everything there. You're never going to achieve it. But if we know what it looks like, this vision of what that life is or what it is, you want to make sure that all your steps are always going in this North Star direction towards that line. You'll never ever get there. But what you don't want to do is be walking a path away from it or sideways from it. And so this is where it's really important. And this is what I want to leave people with, because I see so much in life with people just jumping into goal setting or bucket list goal setting and things like this. And you can't effectively start there. You have to start with this so that you can create goals that will allow you to express those things, which is what I was getting at earlier with the grand goals. Like obviously with grand goals, you could see I had the opportunity, one, creativity to create a unique set of goals instead of something that was predefined by someone else. A huge challenge, huge sense of accomplishment, and it was something that would generate a lot of recognition. Boom, I got 4 major ones right there in a bucket that allow me. But if that falls apart, it's not the end of the world. I can find something else that creates that. So if it allows you also a little bit of sense of relief in knowing I have, if my goal is to be an NFL star or to repeat Chris Duffin's grand goals, well, not everyone has the physical genetic capability to do that. Okay. And you can't think, oh, my world's over. I'm not going to be able to be an NFL star. I can't realize my life goals. If you know why you want to be that, you could find other paths that will help you realize and express that. And this is why it's really important. I can't just create a goal. I want to be an NFL star. No, you have to start with that understanding and that deep-rooted whys. So the 5 whys process is great, and then living and moving in that continuous improvement, North Star, Kaizen type approach. So those are 2 manufacturing engineering type concepts laid into personal philosophy.
Thank you. That is so perfect. I'm going to take that to my teenage son who wants to be an NFL star, and I'm going to say, why?
Why? What does it mean to you? And just keep digging deeper until you really get to the nugget of what that is.
Thank you so much, Chris. If anyone has any last questions or comments, we can take them. Otherwise, I will follow up with an email and with all of these resources. And I can't thank you enough for spending your Saturday morning with us, Chris, and everyone on the line. So.
It's been great. I'd love to get a copy of this if you, I know you recorded it. So,
yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And keep in touch. And thank you, Chris. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Have a
Chris.
great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.